All right, so we've had vampires, we've had cultists, and we've had wizards, we've had a haunted house, and now we have ourselves a good old adventure, national treasure type episode. So this show for me has been just a wild variety, a mixed bag of genres. It's full of mystery, it has some tragedy, intrigue, it has a lot of history. Mix all of those elements in with some 1950s segregation, racism, of course, a cast comprised of mainly black actors and actresses with a Twilight Zone type of filming. And we have something that I believe to be extremely original and fresh. For me anyway, I've never seen a show quite like this. I know that the show is based off of a book or a series of novels, but when it comes to seeing something actually on screen, this is something different, and I appreciate that. So episode 4, there's a lot to unpack here. The other day I was joking around with my brothers about how Tick could be like Harry Potter, but it seems like the show actually may be headed in that direction. Tick actually mentions to Letty that they need to go and get these scripts so that they can learn this ancient language so that they can cast protective spells on themselves so that they can basically ward off these cultists and wizards. Tick is definitely giving off that chosen one kind of vibe. So Tick, Letty, his father Montrose go on another road trip, and this time they're actually going to a museum in Boston. Accompanying them though is Hippolyta, which is Tick's aunt, and his cousin D, Hippolyta's daughter. Since D and Hippolyta are both lovers of the arts, they decide they want to go to a museum. So why not? And and Montrose actually he's like, what can I do? It's their car. They're using their car. But Hippolyta and D don't know why Tick, Letty, and Montrose are actually going to the museum for. But this time around, they aren't so focused on the journey as they were on episode 1. Instead, they're very heavily focused on the destination. So to give you some context, Tick and Letty actually have to try to convince Montrose to accompany them to the museum. Somewhere in the museum are these ancient scripts that would actually allow Tick to learn an ancient language, which in turn would allow him to cast spells. And the thing about this though, Montrose actually knows a lot more than he's willing to tell, but he just seems to be really afraid. And Tick and Letty, they really want to get to the bottom of all of this. Montrose just wants to leave it. He doesn't want no part of it. He doesn't want Tick to do this anymore. He just wants them to let it go. He thinks it's too dangerous. He kind of compared it to the Allies versus the Soviets. I think he was listening to something on the radio, or maybe he was watching something on TV. I can't remember what it was. But he compared that situation to them being, the Reds or the Soviets, and that order or the cultists to be, basically the odds are stacked against them. So the only reason Montrose actually ends up going is because he kind of gets guilted into going. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to Tick, and he knows that Tick is not going to let it go. He'd rather go with Tick, and try to keep him, safe, instead of just having him go out there blindly, because either way he knows Tick is going to go. So Montrose, reluctantly tags along. So now we have an Uncharted or Indiana Jones. Shout out to my brother James for that Indiana Jones reference. Now we have a really adventurous style of episode, which involves hidden passages, underground tombs, dark, tight, claustrophobic corridors, MacGuffins, and even a reanimated corpse. That actually happens in this episode, which isn't the wildest thing to happen in this episode. I mean, the first 3 had crazier things happen than reanimated corpses. And I'm really loving the style switch up for these episodes. And each one has been a different theme, and that's really keeping the audience guessing. It's making the show feel layered and more appealing to a wider audience if they're able to shoot these episodes in a different kind of style or theme, each episode. And also it just keeps it fresh. Also, there are a few moments in this episode, small, subtle moments that surprised me. For example, once the crew got to the museum, there was no sign of any kind of segregation there. White people and black people were both, co-mingling in the museum. They were just laying around in the planetarium all together. D and Hippolyta were in there chilling, talking to white people, and it was cool to see. It was nice to see, because up until this point, we haven't really seen any decent white people in the show. So I'm really glad that, the show showcased that there was some decency. Maybe back in the 50s, the Northeast, section of the United States was more progressive than the Midwest. This episode actually also gives Letty's older sister, her half sister Ruby, some weight here. She actually gets to chew up some of the screen time. As she struggles, she's still struggling to get, a job in the retail industry, where the barrier to entry for, black people pretty much makes it impossible for her to get a position there. And there's one scene where she actually goes to, the retail store where she wants to get a job, but there's already a black person working there, and I think she said there's like 103 employees there. She said they're not going to let 2 black people work there, so that kind of made me feel some kind of way. I felt bad for her in that moment. She'd been trying to get that job for a while, but it ain't working out for her. So she has to go back to the club and sing and play her guitar, where she's not really getting much love there. There's also a sex scene in this episode involving her that was really unexpected. And who she actually got with was a character from one of the previous episodes who was also unexpected. Did not see that coming, but this character has ulterior motives. There's no doubt that this could have some, serious consequences for, the crew moving forward. So Christina, who's actually turned out to be, the story's main antagonist, she was President Fitzgerald's daughter, and she's she seems to be the only cultist left from that group in Artem. So she's also given more to do in this episode as well. She seems to be the one, who gives the exposition on the actual cult and what they're about. Most of what we learn about the cult is pretty much through her. She's pretty much all that's left of, of Artem. So now we actually learn that there are actually different branches of this cult, and that these cults actually have a hand in different facets of society. Like, we discovered that the cult has a hand in law enforcement. I'm pretty sure that their reach and their power extends far beyond law enforcement. She also had an interesting moment that kind of made me laugh, where she was playing hide and seek with these kids, and the kid was like, "Yo, you never played hide and seek?" And she was like, "Nah, I've never played hide and seek." Which kind of makes sense to her character. I can't imagine that, her childhood involved hide and seek when she grew up with, cannibal cultists and they bred vampire guard dogs. I don't think that hide and seek was an integral part of her childhood. So Letty, Tick, and Montrose find a hidden passage underneath this museum, which leads to our Indiana Jones Tomb Raider type of adventure, which actually ends up tying in nicely to the previous episode about the haunted house, because I had some questions about that, which kind of got answered here, but not really. I mean, you still have a lot of questions by the time this episode is over, no doubt. And once again, our group is led to a supernatural event or occurrence at the end of the episode that they don't quite fully understand. And also the episode ends on a cliffhanger that didn't really surprise me, given, this character that gave us a cliffhanger, given what he's done, what he's been doing up to this moment. Also, Hippolyta seems really keen on finding out, the truth behind Uncle George's death, because Tick and Montrose pretty much came up with some BS story about how Uncle George got killed by some racist police, when in fact he was killed by the cultists. Tick and Montrose didn't want to explain all of that to Hippolyta. Hippolyta actually ends up finding Hippolyta's daughter actually ends up finding Uncle George's atlas in the glove compartment of Woody. They call the car Woody. Hippolyta actually finds out where Uncle George, Tick, and Letty went on their first road trip back in episode 1. So it seems like Hippolyta is about to go to Artem, try to figure out what exactly happened, to Uncle George. She's still torn up about it. She's still broken up about it. Everyone else seems to have moved on, but she's not believing for 1 minute the story that Tick and Montrose told her about Uncle George's death. So I was really feeling the overall vibe and, just everything that came with this episode.
Alright guys, so unfortunately the battery died on the camera, but you guys understand that, I'm loving the tone of the show. Can't wait for episode 5. Okay, bye.